Good afternoon, everyone. You have joined the Ask Nancy live stream. I'm Nancy Berger. As you all know, if you're watching live or watching the replay, I do these once a month. I invite cool people to talk about cool stuff. And today is no exception. I have invited my friend Alexandra Suchman. I call her Alex, but definitely get the Suchman right. I'm just joking. We were laughing about this before coming on. Alex and I crossed paths a while ago, I think, Alex. And we talked about the work that she does, which is awesome. So Alex is the CEO and co-founder of Barometer XP. And what she does is helps companies to create cultures where people are excited to go to work. Isn't that an awesome idea? And she uses the power of games and play to strengthen trust in the workplace, increase accountability, and create psychological safety. All things companies all need. So, Alex, welcome. It's lovely to have you here. And I always love to talk about play because it is so impactful in so many areas of our life. But why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about what you do than I did?
Yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly, is making work a place that people want to be. The vast majority of people have to work. We're not independently wealthy. We have to buy things. We're not living off the grid and working off the land. And so you have to work and you have to be around other people as part of that job. And work is so much more pleasant and meaningful if you can get along with those people. It's not that you have to be best friends with them, but if you can see each other as allies, as people who have your back, as people who share a goal, which is having the company succeed and either selling services or products or making things, whatever it is, and doing that together. And to me, it's really sad that so many people feel like their work is so isolating and they don't feel valued and they don't see how they belong or how their work contributes. They feel like they're demeaned. That to me is it's inhumane. And it's also not how you get great performances out of people. It's
Right.
not how you get them to be accountable for their work or to feel loyal to the company. And I just feel really passionately about changing that. And play is a great tool for that journey.
Now it is. And for so many things in our lives, like we kind of give up on play when we grow up sometimes, and it's really
We get too
grown up
serious.
stuff. Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind, tell me what brought you to this work. I don't know that I've ever heard the story really, but I'm really, as you're talking, I'm really curious, like, how did you get here? How did you get to find
It's a very
found it?
twisty turvy story. So I spent the first half of my career, over a decade, in public policy, specifically focused on health and social policy. I'm in the DC area, in DC proper. And, a lot of people in this area move here because we believe in public service, believe in making the best possible programs you can offer, believe in building a strong safety net for people in this country, making sure they get good healthcare, all of these things.
Yeah.
And I loved working with really smart and really dedicated people who are also very passionate about things like equity and access and services. But the experience of the workplace was so chaotic. And these were people who liked each other and felt that, hey, we're all in this together. We all have that sense of buy-in. But because there was such a focus on the mission, on executing the mission, there was very little on how do you structure the culture and what resources are in place. So I just started seeing that there were a lot of unnecessary, completely predictable and preventable friction points that were causing people to burn out, that were causing conflict, that were causing issues in the quality of work and the timeliness of work. And for whatever reason, that type of systems thinking of, okay, this is the problem, what's the root of it, what can we do to change it, came very intuitively to me. So I ended up shifting within the same company I was working, from being on the research and program project manager side to organization development of trying to build the infrastructure for this company, both on the process side, but also on the people and culture side.
Can I
And I
interrupt you
love,
for a second?
yeah, please.
Can you give me a couple examples of friction points so that our audience can kind of contextualize this whole thing?
Yeah, so the company had grown pretty quickly. When I started, it was 5 people. By the time I moved into this role, it was between 20 and 30. And so you had a lot more people who were supervisors, a lot more people who were leading projects. And a lot of people didn't have any type of management or leadership experience. They sort of were good researchers, good analysts, and then got promoted. And as a result of their not only did they not have those skills, a lot of them still wanted to be researchers and didn't really want to do the human management side of things.
Mm-hmm.
So they weren't clear in giving expectations. They would say, hey, we have this report to do, let's do it and hand it to me by this date. And they would get it and say, this isn't what I wanted. And the team would say, well, we don't know what you wanted. And they would say, well, you should know, I said this. And they didn't really say, this is how a report looks to me. This is what the process looks like. This is in it. It's just, I want a report. And everybody comes to a job having a different educational background, different professional background. A report is going to look very different depending on where you came from.
Yeah.
And so, working with the managers on how do you lay out your expectations and how do you give feedback in a way that's not just, hey, this was really crappy, go do it again.
Yeah.
That doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
Things like that. Things like there not being consistency in how things were done across the company. So even in, how people were filling out their timesheets, and that just caused a lot of rework for the HR and operations people.
So we're talking about like leadership stuff, basic leadership stuff and basic management stuff. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. That is often, it's like, oh, we don't have time to focus on, the internal stuff because we're focusing on the external stuff, which is maybe the biggest mistake you can make, because that's how things get done, is that, the nitty gritty process and infrastructure stuff.
Right. Like they're as strong as their weakest process, right?
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
that. So, okay. Yeah. So then you get to, okay, how do I make this better? And you got to organized play, or I don't know how you would characterize it, but tell me about that.
Yeah. So I did that internally, the OD stuff, for a couple of years. Then I went out on my own as a consultant to do that type of work. And what I kept noticing over and over is no matter how seemingly straightforward the project I was brought in to do, whether it was help us organize our shared drive, this is in the pre-COVID days when not everybody had a nice shared drive where people could access everything in the cloud, or we need to revisit position descriptions, or we need a process manual for this event that we do every year. The hardest part was getting all the people on board. Everybody had their way of doing things and their way of understanding the problem and their vision of the solution. But everybody also had the mentality of, well, the way I do it is right. It's everybody else who needs to change. And there was such a lack of self-awareness and lack of trust to have a conversation about a problem where everybody could be really honest. Often when I would first have the meeting with the team, people would be like, everything's fine, whatever. We'll just defer to the leader. And so I would start working on it and start presenting it. And they'd be like, that's not helpful at all. That's really stupid, or that's going to make our lives worse. And it's like, well, you didn't tell me what you needed. So that to me seemed like the central problem, is if people can't communicate with each other, if they don't feel comfortable, maybe they don't even know how to reflect and advocate for their own needs. And so I started looking at what are some tools to do that. And, I think there's a lot of assessments and frameworks out there that are great, that are very helpful, DISC and StrengthsFinder and all those, but they don't make the leap to behavior change. It's still just giving people knowledge and terminology. Correct. And I felt like there needed to be something much more experiential. And that's when I found play. Because if you look at just about any game, any activity, there's some type of problem solving. There's an objective you're trying to get to, and you have to think in different ways. If there's other people involved, you have to communicate and collaborate. All of the same interpersonal skills that come up at work are present within the games. And so it's a way to draw people's attention to not the subject matter of the game itself, but how they're working together, how they're thinking, what assumptions are they making, what are some opportunities to do something a little bit differently to get a better outcome, and just discover that it's this incredible tool.
Do you have to set it up? What I mean by this is, do you find that with certain teams, it's like if you walked in and said, we're going to play this game right now because I'm trying to get you all to trust each other, or do you go in and say, we're going to play this game right now, and then they engage, not knowing the motivation behind the game, so that they're all in, because sometimes they may be resistant, or am I off base there?
No, you're 100% accurate. Part of what my company Barometer does is sort of building the scaffold around how to use play, because so many people, if I come in and we're going to do a game and that's the first thing they hear, they avoid eye contact, they roll their eyes, they say that we've done this before and it's really stupid. So we've built a whole framework around how do you connect very specific activities to the conversations, the skills, the outcomes that you want to get to, and you lead with that. You say, hey, I know you've had a bunch of new people join, you don't know each other that well. It's really important to get to know people, not just in their roles and responsibilities, but as people. We're going to do this game. Sometimes I have to use activity or experience, because sometimes the word games and play are like curse words.
Yeah.
Where we're just going to learn some things about each other. And then at the end, you have a reflection. Hey, what did you learn? What did you notice? Is there a way that these insights could be helpful in how you work together? Did you figure out that you have something in common with people? And usually, because you've told them this is why you're spending your time this way, this is what we're looking to get out of it. It's not about how well you do. It's not about winning. It's not about, you're not being evaluated in any way. Usually people will let their guard down some and be willing to be vulnerable, and they get a lot of benefit out of it. Realize you had something in common with somebody, or somebody brings a perspective that you don't have that's actually really complementary in helping you do your work. Or just, I think it's often really undervalued how important social capital is, just building up those positive moments and positive thoughts and assumptions about people. So when things get hard, you can help, you'll help each other, you're in it together. And that's sort of the bare minimum of what you can do with play. That's what we call team bonding. And then you can go a lot deeper.
Okay. That was my next question. Like, is it that you start at sort of with some activity to try to find an equilibrium or get connection and bonding, and then there's trust, not just among the team, but with your team.
Yeah.
And then they may go a little deeper to next level. Is that the kind of the way it works, where it's just very case specific?
Yeah, it's very case specific. And so we have, if you picture an iceberg and you split it up into 3 different sections, we call it the levels of depth that you can accomplish through play. And the top level, the part that's above the surface, is having fun, building that social capital, having some moments of levity and joy together. A lot of us don't experience that at work all the time, and it's really important. And that's where you have to start, especially if it's a team that's experienced any type of change or friction recently. Because any type of play there's an inherent vulnerability to it, and people have to feel safe to have that vulnerability. But once you have that, then you can go a little bit deeper and do an activity that's maybe people aren't really comfortable giving and receiving feedback. So you can do a game that has a component of feedback, and you've created this space where people are laughing, and they're trusting each other, and they're willing to step out of their comfort zone a little bit. And so then in the context of the game, we could say, hey, Nancy, it was really helpful how you said this. Next time, could you give these details first? Because that's just how I process information. And it's not a big deal, because it's not related to something very high stakes. It's all in the context of the game. But we've just had a really important insight about how we can communicate better in a way that's going to get to a better outcome. And so that's what we call team building, is those individual insights on how we can understand each other better, or change our thought patterns, or change our own assumptions.
You're speaking my language now, changing our thought pattern. So team building as differentiated from team bonding, which is kind of the first level. Okay. So question for those of the audience that may be, like me, they're coaches or speakers, or they facilitate workshops or whatever. Do you certify people to use your operating system, for lack of a better phrase, or do you go in, it's proprietary, and you go in because somebody might wonder about this?
Both. I mean, we certainly do facilitation, but we really want to grow play and game-based experiential learning as a discipline that is validated, that is respected, that is sought after. And so we have a certification program for other facilitators, coaches, speakers who want to bring more play into it. And it's not so much about, the whole program is done through, most of the time is spent playing and reflecting on games, but it's with the lens of using these different tools. So we have the iceberg framework. We have something called the pressure matrix. That's the 9 dimensions of team culture. And how do you understand what a team's challenges are and then pick the right game and frame that game so it's relevant to those challenges? How do you advocate for why play is such an important element of learning and development and change? And so it's every aspect of the experience design and facilitation.
Wow.
And then we have a whole community of practice and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and the website, like I've seen, there's so many options. There's so much rich content and different layers and different problems that you can address with these programs. So it's really, for those of you watching or listening, it's really a treasure trove. I would encourage you to check things out. We'll give you information about how to get in touch with Alex at the end. But so next question, Alex, I'd love to hear, because some of these, the knots in the rope of organizations or teams can be really tricky. Like you have all sorts of different personalities, or as you just referenced, there's change afoot. There's been a workforce restructuring, or there's been some sort of layoff, or there's been some sort of upset. And it's difficult for organizations and teams to navigate change sometimes. I know because I facilitate workshops with a lot of them. So what are some of the tough cases? I mean, can you give us a few examples or an example of a situation where this really broke through for a company or a team?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, we were working with a small biotech startup, and they had their core team. I think there were 8 to 10 people at that time, and maybe a little bit more than that, and felt like it was difficult because the founders had biotech backgrounds. They were scientists, but then they needed to hire a marketing person and an operations person. And, scientists think there's a specific way. I mean, overgeneralization, but, it's very methodical. It's very objective and sort of data oriented. That's not necessarily how marketers think. That's not necessarily how operations or HR people think.
Right.
And so they wanted to make sure that their leadership team all understood each other, spoke the same language, learned the same language, so that every time the marketing person was like, hey, we need an update, the scientists weren't like, that's a waste of time, let us just be in the lab, because that's, to run a business, you need all of those things to work. And they'd had some trouble with some of the core, some of the leadership team members, not because they were not smart people or not really talented and great in the position, but just because they came from really different backgrounds. They thought really differently. They processed information and communicated really differently. So to start off, before we worked with the whole team, we did a couple of sessions with the leadership team and did a few games and simulations to really shine a light on how each person thinks and communicates, to understand each other's behavior and thought patterns. And this wasn't even in like the big meaty simulation. This was just one of the sort of team building game to get people reflecting and thinking and being more self-aware and sharing. And there was such a breakthrough aha moment. There was one member of the leadership team who people had a hard time understanding. He just thought really differently. He wasn't a great communicator in the way that they were looking for. But over the course of this game, they realize how he does think. He takes a lot of notes. And so in their mind, they were like, well, he's just collecting information for himself. He's not really interested. But he needed to take these notes. English wasn't his first language.
I was going to ask you that.
He needed to process the information, and then he could communicate about it. He couldn't just immediately jump in. And once they understood that, it was like this light bulb moment of, okay, great, we can share information ahead of time at meetings. We should ask, hey, can you synthesize those notes and share them so we all have them, because it's great information that's not just for one person. And it was this amazing breakthrough where they understood each other better. They understood, everybody communicates a little bit differently, and sometimes you need to find a compromise so that nobody's being completely left out. or nobody feels like their voice isn't being heard or isn't important.
It's just astonishing to me. So a couple of takeaways from that I think are worth highlighting. First of all, especially in these, highly intellectual, highly specialized, industries, biotech being one of them. I mean, there's so many different languages and different cultures and different things at play. So the language thing, but then it's also understanding what's being said. And these two things, which are they're not subtle, yet people really don't feel comfortable saying, hey, like, could we figure out a way? Like, why are you taking notes? I'd love to have them. Or like, are you understanding what I'm saying? Or these simple things that people don't do and they don't ask. And the catalytic process that takes place when they're given an activity or a game or something to do that gets them out of their discomfort for a minute and then breaks things, because we're all that's kind of sounds like what happened.
Yeah, your audio cut out for a little bit, but I think I got, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And I would say that,
Did I?
Yeah, looks like you're back now.
Okay. God.
I think so many workplace conflicts boil down to a small misunderstanding or wrong assumptions attributed to somebody's behavior, or a lack of communication that can really be prevented if you just invest a little bit more. And one thing that makes me really mad and sort of scared for the future of work is the more we rely on technology, the less room we make for the being human, for the emotions that we experience, for these types of differences, for valuing the time it takes to build those types of relationships. And I don't think it's a coincidence that with people spending most of their time in front of computers and just interacting with different software and applications, that people feel lonely and miserable at work. I mean, maybe it's efficient in terms of how fast things can get done, but if ultimately it's not good quality, if people don't feel engaged and so they don't like their job and they're not paying attention and they leave, that's a terrible recipe for company success. It's not going to work. I mean, I think a lot of that's happening at the federal government right now.
Oh, right. And who doesn't want to just feel better? I mean, let's just start there. Who doesn't want to just feel better at work, feel better interacting with colleagues, just feel better and more connected and more engaged? And you're going to want to go back the next day. And then you're not going to dread it on Sunday night. And then you're not going to wait till Friday. I mean, so much good stuff gets lost when that's the dynamic.
Yes. Yeah. And there's such an emphasis way more on the subject matter expertise and sort of the content of the work than how it's done. And I think the how it's done, yes, it's sort of process and having the right tools, but it's also the culture. It's the environment that people work in. Do they know who to go to when they have questions? Do they know that their questions will be answered and not, shamed or ridiculed in any way? Do they understand how their work contributes? Do they know what their trajectory is? How they can continue and learn and grow? Do they understand how decisions are made so they don't feel like it's being made arbitrarily and imposed on them? Like, these things are all vital to keeping people engaged and motivated and excited and accountable in their work.
Yeah. And like you said earlier on when we started, do they know how the report should be done? Is there consistency across, like, does everybody know what's expected of them, what the measurements are, what the goals are? These are simple that maybe sometimes are just taken for granted that everyone knows, or they should know. Well, no, they're not going to know if nobody tells them. So it's interesting. I was going to ask you also about if you've done work with startups, and your example was just that. So because I can imagine that there's a lot of things in the startup culture where you have the founder who may or may not really be a leader, may be really talented and brilliant and have a great idea, but may not yet be a leader. So I would imagine that there would be a big demand for this kind of stuff at the startup level, but also they're always really short on, sometimes are short on cash. So like it can be tricky, but do you work with a lot of startups?
A fair number. I mean, I would say most of our work is not with startups, but we've had a fair number of clients who are in that space. But yeah, and you know, a lot of it depends on the industry and also the financing. You know, one of the things, so my company, we were thinking about 2 years ago, we were going down the path of, you know, we want to get investors, we need, you know, more capital. But we realized very quickly that when you have outside money and outside people who are, you know, making decisions and weighing in on important decisions, they want to get their money back as fast as possible. Sometimes they don't want to, they want the investment to go, you know, on where do you see quick results, and not really investing in culture. And that was one of the things that made us decide to just keep self-funding, because we feel like you can't really be successful if you don't invest in your culture. And we sort of wanted to prove that you can grow in a different way, that you don't need that, like, just move really fast and not pay attention to how people feel and how the work environment, you know, is for
it's not sustainable. I mean, it's not sustainable.
It's not.
And right. So what we're talking about, what you're talking about, and the work that you do with Barometer is really instilling these practices that create a culture where engagement, productivity, collaboration is sustainable, if I'm hearing you right.
Yeah, it's really operationalizing your values. There are so many companies, I've worked in these companies, I've worked with these companies that say, these are our 3 core values. It's, you know, transparency and integrity and open communication. And then you talk to the employees and they're like, yeah, we don't experience any of those things. So you can't just say those and have the intention. You have to figure out, what does this look like and feel like on a day-to-day basis? What is, you know, what does transparency mean? What does integrity mean? How are you communicating that? How are you making sure it's being done and holding leadership accountable to modeling those values? And that's where experiential learning is so important, is so helpful.
Yeah. Are they lived values? You know, are these living values, or are they, you know, posters? So it's so exciting, the stuff that you do. And I think hugely impactful. So I'm getting so many weird Wi-Fi notifications. So I would love you to tell our audience how to get in touch with you, what's the best way, or on social platforms, whatever, and also the website, so they know where to find you.
Yes, absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn, Alexandra Suchman. The company is called Barometer XP, and we are also on LinkedIn. Our website is barometerxp.com. We just built a new web application that includes access to our whole game database, which you can search by, you know, what's a game that has a feedback component? What's a game that encourages creativity? What's a game that has a decision-making component? So you can really connect it to different culture and learning and development initiatives. And that's app.barometerxp.com. Or there's a link to it if you go to our website. And that's free for people to use. There's paid tiers, but the basic one is free and has access to all of our frameworks and our whole game database.
It's so cool.
Want to take a DIY approach to bringing more play into work.
Yes, it's really hugely valuable and a free resource. So, and do you also do like periodic live, like learning modules?
Yeah. Every month we do a free virtual game event that's open to everybody. Those are on, if you go to the Barometer's LinkedIn page under events, those are all listed. Because the best way to really understand it is to get an experience, is to play a game and reflect on it and see what it brought up and get ideas. So we try to offer a lot of opportunities for that. And then for people in the DC area, we do in-person meetups as well.
Oh, you do? That's cool. Oh, that would be fun to do. So if anybody's watching and you're in the DC area, really check that out. So barometerxp.com is the
Mhm.
website. Alexandra Suchman, what a brilliant idea and what a huge impact you will have and continue to have on companies and teams. So thank you so much for joining me on my Ask Nancy live stream. If anyone has any questions, follow up to this, please reach out. I will get your question to Alex, or you can contact her directly through her website. And we'll see you next month for another cool chat with somebody cool. Thanks a
Thank
lot,
you.
Alex.